Welcome to a video review of the Olight Baton Pro. So this was sent to me by Olight Australia for the purposes of review. I've been using it for a couple of days. I've just shoved it back into the box for the purposes of this review. So the main thing about this is it represents part of Olight's new, basically a forking initiative really. So just briefly, Seeker 2 and Seeker 2 Pro, Olight has started releasing pro versions and, well, regular versions, I guess, of a lot of its lights with some differences in what they're for. So this, I guess, to an extent represents a pro version of the S2R Baton that Olight released. So I'll just go through it first and then I'll do a little bit of a discussion. So in your box you get a Baton Pro with a battery. Really importantly, they give you the 3500 milliamp hour battery, and you also get the MCC to charge it, a lanyard, and a little pouch. I've got a few of these pouches by now. But the benefit here is that it's an all-in-one system. So I think the light, I don't know what it costs to be honest. I think it's coming down to about 95 on the flash sale. Sometimes that sounds a bit more expensive, and for those who have lights already, that might provide, you're paying a little bit more for a charger, etc. But in terms of an all-in-one kit that you don't need to buy a separate charger, this concept that Olight has is actually quite brilliant. So when you take it out of the box, you'll notice the knurling. The tube is very, very, very similar, possibly identical to the S2R2. From what I understand, people have been able to swap it over between them. So yeah, you got your normal magnet, which one thing I'm just going to quickly point out that I really like, it connects horizontally and holds on. So you'll find a lot of lights like the M2R, which I'll do some comparisons afterwards, they don't. With the Baton Pro, it holds on, and as I found out, you can then pop on an S1R if you want, and it still holds on. Anyway, that's just one thing that I quite liked, because with 18650 lights, a lot of them tend to fall when you put them horizontally. Anyway, you've got the button, it's got a built-in indicator, so that's green for over, I think, 70%. When it drops to 70%, it turns yellow down until it gets to about 15% from memory. I'll just double check that. But that provides you with an indication of how your battery life is going. For me, I'd just chuck it on the charger if I used it at all that day, so it doesn't really get into the yellows much. Uses a total internal reflection type of optic, so it's a little hunk of plastic. You still get a little bit of a hotspot because it's got differences in the pattern there, but I'll show you in the beam shots. It's mostly a flooder. So this thing, your emitter is probably around here somewhere. So all of that light, not much room for collating the light compared to, for example, an M2R. It's got an actual reflector inside. So it's definitely a floody light. I like the stylistic changes here. I just think that they're pretty. I've been calling them speed holes. And you get a two-way clip. So like the S1R2, so I don't have an S2R, so I'm going to use the S1R as a comparison. But you get a two-way clip again. So you can put it in your pocket this way or that way, and you can clip it to a hat if you wanted to. So threads, pretty nice for me. One thing you'll notice is as you turn it, the clip will pull on these, so I always push it back. Anyway, it comes with a 3500 milliamp hour battery. So one thing to keep in mind when I talk about run times in a minute is that the battery that's included with the Baton Pro has about 500 milliamp hours greater capacity than the one that comes with the S2R2. So the runtimes are with this higher capacity battery too. But yep, so battery comes in. These are the Olight batteries with the special front. This is to facilitate charging of the battery in the light. So you can still charge this in a regular charger. I did charge mine this morning by popping it in there just to test it. But this lets it charge inside the flashlight. If you get a normal keep power battery, for example, that should work, but it won't charge because it doesn't have Olight's proprietary front parts. So what else is included? You get a little lanyard with a little metal doohickey. This is actually really clever because it lets you thread the lanyard through the light a little bit more easily. So you just shove that through and then you can add the light on. I'm not going to put it on because I don't really use lanyards, but that's cool for those who do. This is the 1 amp magnetic charger. So for those who haven't played around with these, that just pops straight on and your light will charge. This light is compatible with the L dock that Olight released. So that's basically a dock that I've got one somewhere actually, but I can't be bothered trying to go get it since it's mounted to a wall. But the dock looks like that. This connects onto it and lets you charge your light. You can have it hanging or standing up, whichever way. But I think they're selling one as part of the bundle with the flash sale tomorrow, but I'm not sure, to be honest. Cool. So charging, that's pretty cool. And you get the little pouch. I've got so many of these, I've stopped using them, but they're rather handy overall. If you don't have 15 pouches, then they're pretty cool. You can store things in them. I think the light fits inside of it, but I wouldn't really store it in there. Now, and you get a manual for whoever decides to read it. Now, let's talk about the user interface briefly. This uses Olight's fairly classical system of running everything through this one button, which I think this is my favorite single button UI, just because it gives you access to so much. So first and foremost, the Moonlight, as it's usually called. I wouldn't really call it Moonlight on this, I'd call it Ultra Low because it's 5 lumens, but you hold it down for half a second and you get that mode. Once it's on, you can just hold it down and it cycles through modes. Now, if you want instant access to the highest mode offering it's got, you just double click whether on or off. And that gives you your turbo if it's on full charge, or high if it's not able to kick into turbo anymore. And also, you can also go into strobe with triple click. So that's, if it's on, double click gives you turbo. If it's off, that's the same thing. And if you're on and you want strobe, you can triple click, same thing. Looking at the runtime on these, actually let's look at runtime and output. So with the S2R, so here's my S2R. This is an image from Olight's site, not mine. With the S2R, you get 1150 lumens for 2 minutes, and then it drops that output down to about 400 lumens for another 230 minutes. The Baton Pro ups that to 2000 lumens, but you only get it for about a minute. So let me just put this up on a little table. So you get 1 minute at 2000 lumens, and then it drops it down to about 600 lumens for 160 minutes. Now, some people don't like turbo modes. They consider it to be disingenuous. I disagree, as long as that's communicated. So if you need 2000 lumens, no light of this size is going to sustain 2000 lumens. You're going to have to get a bigger light. Or if they do sustain it, it's going to get ridiculously hot and risk damage and fire. So they're faced with a choice then of providing you with less brightness or giving you the option of having this turbo mode. So here you'll see that you can run around using your high of 600 versus 400 on the S2R, And if you really need that little extra push, you can go to turbo. So you can get that, basically that 2000 lumen burst mode to just get you across the line when you need it. One thing you'll notice here is that, as I mentioned with the forking in the road kind of thing, with the Baton, the Pro range in general, so whether it's the Seeker 2 Pro or this, you get better run times versus better output. So here, for example, you get that 2000 lumens, but your total runtime is, I guess, 161 minutes versus 232 minutes on the S2R or S2R2. Now, the same thing is seen on most of the modes. So on high, for example, you get 600 lumens out of the Baton Pro. You only get 400 lumens out of the S2R, but it runs half an hour longer. On medium is where it gets really interesting. They're actually evenly matched for output, but again, half an hour lost on the Baton Pro in comparison. And that's probably the LED pulling in that power. I think it's called a power penalty, they call it sometimes. And keep in mind, that is with the Baton Pro actually having a larger battery than the S2R2. Then on low, you actually double the output in the Baton Pro, but you halve the runtime. So you get 30 lumens instead of 15. And then comes the ultra low, which, you know, it's usually called Moonlight. It's the one that happens when you hold this down. On the S2R2, it is half a lumen. On the Baton Pro, it's 5 lumens. And so rather than the 60 days you get on the S2R2, you get 9 days on the Baton Pro. So this light's very much geared around people who want to have basically as much available light on each of the levels as they can. So 5 lumens doesn't sound like much, but if you're in a pitch black room, it's actually really blinding. My fiance would yell at me for having 5 lumens come out. She sometimes thinks half a lumen's too much. So keep that in mind. This is very much designed around optimizing it towards brightness in the small package. The S2R is a mix of brightness and runtime, and compared to this, leans more towards the runtime. So the XHP 50.2 inside of this gives you a nice floody beam, which I'll show you in the beam shots in a second. But in comparison to the S2R again, it's a little bit longer. I think it's the S2R2 comes to about here. I'll show you a couple of other lights just to give you a size indicator. So these are the Seeker 2, Seeker 2 Pro, and the the Baton Pro. And this is the M2R and the S1R2. The magnets are now playing against each other. So for me, the main niche this light will fill, I basically now carry the Seeker 2 Pro all the time. When I have a jacket, I'll sometimes carry the M2R instead. But as summer turns up and I won't have a jacket, I've been looking to get a thinner light that I can shove in another pocket if I need to. This seems to be filling that niche for me. It's a little bit wider and longer than the Seeker, so the S2R2. And I think for me, if I was buying them from the beginning, I'd probably go for the S2R2 for me, because it's got that thinness to it, and I really like having half a lumen. But I've also got my brightness covered with a whole bunch of other things. If you really want brightness and you want this form factor, then the Baton Pro is the better option. If you want runtime and low, and you want even tinier, then the S2R2 is probably the better option. It's a highly capable light, so let's look at how it does outdoors. So just as a comparison, that's darkness. This is the neutral white M2R on turbo. And there's a tree right in the middle. Seeker 2 turbo. Tree again, you can see it a bit more clearly now. Baton Pro. That's Moonlight, obviously you can't see it. So low. You can kind of just see a little bit of light move. Next up, a little bit better. So from here you can really see it on the video. Back to low. So this is the turbo. So very, very, very floody beam, but pretty damn good. It's a massive area it lights up actually. So it still hits those buildings at the back. So let's just do a quick drop test as well. This is rated to 1.5 meters. This is just going to be onto carpet because I don't want to damage my floors, but let's turn it on before we drop it. So it's working fine. So I'm quite fond of this Baton Pro. It's a good little light. It's slightly wider and longer than the S2R2, but I don't think it's noticeably so. It's longer than the S1R2, but that's a 16340 light. So for me, when I keep it in my pocket, my fingers tend to smack against the clip. I'm planning on putting it on my belt over summer, so that would be in place of the S1R2, which is shorter. The only two gripes I've got, and they kind of cancel each other out. With other Olights, if I set it to medium, and from off I go to, let's say, turbo, when I turn it off, and I just push the button once again on other Olights, it'll turn on to whatever my saved mode was, so low. But here, it turns on to that, whatever the last mode was, regardless of how I accessed it. I don't think that holds true for strobe though. So it just memorizes your last like regular mode. I usually keep my saved mode on low, and that way I have moonlight, low, and high at an instant notice. In this instance though, because the moonlight is gone and it's actually 5 lumens, that's basically how I'd use it anyway. So I'd hold it to get my low and I double click for my high. So that's what I mean about one gripe offsetting the other, because I'd like to have a half lumen low, but because that's gone, the way I'd use my last memorized mode is also not an issue. It's a pretty good light to carry if you want to have a bunch of light. The main things that what I would suggest to consider the S2R in its place is pretty much, I think, the moonlight, because the size isn't really a big deal for me. The fact that the clips like this is basically the same between them. So what you're really looking at here is the moonlight and the runtime. If you're okay with having a little bit of a reduction in runtime to have a much higher maximum, and you're okay with getting rid of the moonlight, then I would say definitely go the Baton Pro. If you really need moonlight and you want to be able to rely on this light for 60 days in a row because you're planning on getting stuck in a cave or something, then I would say go the S2R2. If you are picking it up, I'd go for an LDOC just because the LDOC is pretty cool. I would be tempted to get it in blue just because I've got so many black lights, but I quite like the black on this. I'm not as fond of blue on these lights. But yeah, thanks.